Hello and welcome to GuardCast, a podcast that offers insight to soldiers and civilians from subject matter experts across the board. I'm your host, Sergeant Joseph Goldsmith, and thank you for tuning in. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. Today's episode is all about IET, Initial Entry Training at FMRC. That's the Francis Marion Reception Company, where final in-processing for all new recruits take place. This includes administering the oath of service, issuing uniforms and IDs, basic soldiering skills such as rank recognition, military courtesy, grooming, wear of the uniform, deployment readiness, basic tactical communications, first aid, Army drill, etc. But let's have a subject matter expert tell us about this process instead of me. The NCOIC of IET is Command Sergeant Major Ken Cabe. Ken Cabe is a graduate of the University of Georgia. He joined the 108th Division U.S. Army Reserve in 1969. Private First Class Cabe completed basic training and infantry advanced training at Fort Lewis, Washington. 2 years later, he enrolled in drill sergeant school and graduated as first distinguished graduate of the class of 1972. Cabe served as a basic training platoon sergeant, specializing in teaching drill and ceremonies and hand-to-hand combat. He later served as senior instructor at the 108th Division Drill Sergeant School, teaching military instruction techniques. In 1977, Sergeant First Class Cabe was recognized as the nation's top Army Reserve drill sergeant, winning the Army's Drill Sergeant of the Year competition at Fort Monroe, Virginia. Cabe enlisted in the South Carolina State Guard in 2013 as a training NCO. Since then, he has served as First Sergeant for Division Headquarters Detachment. He is currently serving in a dual role as NCOIC of the Francis Marion Reception Company and Command Sergeant Major of the Professional Services Command. Sergeant Major, it is an absolute honor to have you on today, and I'm glad you agreed to be a part of this.
Thank you. I'm proud to be here.
Today's episode is all about what can a new recruit expect when they are driving up to Columbia, South Carolina, heading into Francis Marion Reception Company. So if you want to elaborate, what should new recruits expect and what should they not expect?
Well, let's talk about what they should not expect to start with, because sometimes people are a little bit apprehensive about coming into a really unfamiliar culture. The military is totally different from the civilian world. Everybody has heard the stories about basic training, and they've heard the stories about the drill sergeants and all of that, and I can attest to that because that was a role I played at one time. But South Carolina State Guard is not the Army. Our mission is different and our approach is different. So the first thing that people can expect is they will be treated with respect and courtesy when they come to Francis Marion Reception Company. Nobody's going to yell. Nobody's going to get in your face. Nobody's going to make you get out and do push-ups and any of that kind of stuff. It is a professionally run organization, pretty much like you would expect out of a technical college. That's sort of the model that we try to follow.
So we just walked through the door, okay? And we are given the order to go find a seat. So we sit down, we take a seat, and then we sit there, we look up, we've got our stuff by our chair, and we're looking around the room, kind of wide-eyed and bushy-tailed, wondering what's about to happen. What types of things do you think would be helpful for a new recruit to be processing while they're sitting there, waiting for you or for whoever is going to be coming out at the time and to get their attention?
Well, I think that the first thing that you ought to be thinking about is the importance of being on time. I don't tolerate late very well. If somebody is punctual and has a good attitude, they're going to be fine at Francis Marion Reception Company. But to answer your question directly about what people should be thinking about is going to happen, the way this thing works out is when you come in and you take your seat and look through the paperwork that is piled there, you're gonna start getting a notion that there will be several things happening. Here are the things that you need to really think about. First thing that's probably going to happen is you will be given the oath of service for the South Carolina State Guard. Our oath is very similar to the oath that the Army takes, very similar to the oath that the President takes. So you'll be given the oath of service. You will be issued a uniform. You will be issued an ID card. Y'all, this is important. Make sure that you've got a good haircut and you're shaved and all of that kind of stuff, because there's a picture with your ID card. And if you don't meet the grooming standards, you can't get your ID picture made on that first day. So the first day is, the first half of the first day is mostly in processing stuff. ID cards, uniforms, oath of service, a little bit of orientation. And once that is done, after lunch, we'll get into the serious business of military training.
Okay, so now we've just finished chow on day one, and we're into the second half. What are the variables that determine what happens after chow on the first day?
Well, the weather is a big factor, certainly, on whether you go outside or not. I try to go outside at least once during each drill, and primarily that is to help people get a feel for what it's like to march in a formation. So we don't have to stay outside very long, but it's always a good idea to come prepared for the weather. But we do work around the weather. We're not going to go out in the sleet and the snow and all this kind of stuff just to learn to march. We'll wait until the next time to learn to march if that's what the situation is. So we will learn drill. Much of the drill that we do is what's called stationary drill. You're standing in one place. You're not actually marching. So we can do all of that stuff indoors. We also learn how to wear the uniform. That seems like a sort of a simple thing. You put on your pants and you put on your shirt, but that's not the way you wear a military uniform. There's an art to it. There's a skill to it, and you have to be taught. And also that first day, you will learn basic military courtesy, basic rank structure, those things that have to do with fitting into a military culture.
And also, just to clarify for the listeners, on day one, you will not be in uniform.
That's right, because you won't have a uniform until you get there. And you still are not going to have your uniform set up with the name tapes and the patches and all the stuff that goes with it. And this is a point that we make with everybody, is unless your uniform is complete, you don't wear any of it. So the first weekend, you don't wear a uniform. The second weekend you come back, you should be in uniform, and that uniform should be perfect.
So that brings us up to a good point. Where would a new recruit pick up the things that they need for the uniform, such as name tape?
Yeah, the basic uniform is going to be issued to you, but you've got to have a tape with your name on it. We'll issue you a tape that says South Carolina State Guard. Those are the things that are worn on the uniform itself. You're also going to have rank insignia, depending on what rank you happen to be. So rank insignia and name tapes are what we call private purchase. Everybody has got to buy their own. There are a couple of ways to do that. One, you can get name tapes made at the U.S. Patriot store right outside Fort Jackson. And if you're close by, that's probably a good thing to do. But all this stuff can be purchased online, and that's how most people do it. If you just don't happen to be living right around Columbia, it's much easier to do it online, and you will be presented with instructions, how to order, some suggestions about who you can order from. So all of that will be covered on the first day of Francis Marion.
And also an important fact for those of you listening that are not in yet, the U.S. Patriot store in Columbia is the only one that we are able to get into in the state of South Carolina, because the other one in Charleston is actually on base, and we are not authorized to go on any military base. We just can't. You can't just walk up and flash your ID and walk in. That's not how it works. And that conversation will be covered in another episode. Sergeant Major, you touched on a good point. We kind of talked about this in a previous episode with Sergeant Kidman. When you come in and you have to get your private purchases, such as your name tape and your rank insignia. So not everybody is going to come in as a private. Some people might come in as another rank. Would you like to take a few minutes to just talk about the enlisted side and why somebody sitting there listening to this podcast, might be looking at their paperwork at their Form 4 and say, okay, well, I'm coming in as a corporal. Why? If let's say I wasn't ever in the military, or but I was a sergeant in, ROTC, in high school, or something to that matter.
All right, let's just talk about initial rank assignment across the board. State Guard operates on an Army system, so we use the Army rank system for all of our personnel. But in a military system, there are three broad categories of rank. You've got enlisted people who are generally considered to be the workers, the blue collar people. You have warrant officers who are highly skilled and highly trained specialists in a particular field. And you have commissioned officers who are the managers of a military organization. In the South Carolina State Guard, if you have a bachelor's degree or higher, you qualify to be considered as an officer. If you have an associate's degree or higher, you qualify for consideration as a warrant officer. If you've got a high school diploma or a college degree or an associate's degree or whatever, you also can be an enlisted person. So it depends a little bit on what your goals are, what you want to be, as long as you have the qualifications. So, but if you're an enlisted person, chances are you're going to come in as a private or a private first class, something like that. If you've got a strong background, either ROTC, or if you have worked for a paramilitary organization or something like that, you might could come in as a corporal or maybe even as a sergeant. There's a good deal of flexibility in that initial ranking assignment. Something that we're working on right now, trying to smooth that process out. But it's highly unlikely for an enlisted person to come in at a rank certainly not any higher than sergeant. If you have an associate's degree, you probably could come in as a warrant officer 1. If you have a bachelor's degree or higher, chances are you could come in as a second lieutenant or first lieutenant, or if you have a professional skill and a lot of work experience, perhaps even higher.
And I do think it is important to point out, though, at this point, after that statement, that for those of you that are prior, you'll understand what I'm saying. There must be a slot available in order for a lot of times for that rank assignment to occur. An example, for me is I'm in the process of being appointed to second lieutenant, and but I am currently a sergeant. Now, I have a bachelor's degree, I have a master's degree, I had 12 years of professional experience, but that still did not qualify me for to come in as a second lieutenant. Because at the time there was not a slot available and I was non-prior. While yes, on paper, you can, you could have a bachelor's degree or master's degree and technically you should be walking into a certain type of role, but sometimes the stars, if they're not aligned properly, you might come in at a lower grade than what you think you might be coming in as. So I just want to make sure that is said as well. So that way, if there's a listener hearing this and like, oh, great, I have a bachelor's degree, and I graduated with honors, that I should definitely be coming in as this. So don't be deterred, don't be discouraged if you are expecting, let's say, to come in as a first lieutenant, but you come in as a second lieutenant, or if you're expecting an officer slot, but you come in as, let's say, a staff sergeant. That's just the conversation that you'll have to have with your recruiter.
There's one other thing that maybe we ought to mention here. You were talking about your personal experience. I'll talk about mine. I have a college degree, but I have never wanted to be anything but a non-commissioned officer. So if you have a college degree and you are interested in being a blue collar worker rather than a manager, there's nothing wrong with that. So make sure that your recruiter knows about that. If you want to be an enlisted guy, nobody is going to make you be an officer.
Exactly. And that's a very, very true statement. It was funny. I was just a couple of weeks ago, I was having lunch with a first sergeant, and we were talking about his daughter, and who is retired now and everything, and was saying that when she became an officer, just the realities of the paperwork that is involved, and yeah, it's a completely different mindset when you're an officer. I mean, if paperwork's not really your thing, like if you went through college and you have your degree and your experience, but you just don't want to mess with paperwork, you should really consider staying enlisted, and your recruiter might want you to become an officer, but you say, no, I'm not interested in sitting around doing paperwork all day. Like I just want to come out and I want to be boots on the ground. Like you really, really, really need to consider what you will be doing, depending on if you are enlisted or officer or a warrant officer in that respects. So, all right. So day one is complete. And so we wake up day two, and we come back out for the first weekend of IET. So on day two, more drill. And then we get into some of our good old book learning. Sergeant Major, if you would give a couple hints as to maybe some of the people that you will be discussing, if anybody would want to get a head start, and maybe there might be some questions that some recruits have to answer from time to time.
Yeah, I think what you're going for right now is my interest in history. And I really think it's important that we recognize the people who have come before us, who have made things possible, like we see them right now. I'm not a historian, and I'm not a scholar by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm very interested in individual achievement. And we talk in Francis Marion about the individual achievements of soldiers who have gone before. We talk about a U.S. Marine whose name was Dan Daly. If you don't know about Dan Daly, it's worth reading up on him. We talk about an NCO in the 2nd South Carolina Regiment in the Revolutionary War, Sergeant William Jasper. We talk about various people who are significant to both the South Carolina State Militia and historically. We talk about the Battle of the Alamo and the connections to South Carolina at the Battle of the Alamo. That's something interesting. If you don't know about it, read up on that.
And I will disagree with you, Sergeant Major. You said that you are not a historian and a scholar. I very, very much disagree with that statement. You are very much a historian and a scholar. If you haven't had the opportunity, you need to check out, for those of you listening, you need to check out episode 3 of this podcast, and it's one of Sergeant Major's essays, and it's fantastic. So if you're not sure if you think that if he is an academic and a historian, just go listen to that, and I think you would agree with me on that nature. All right, so weekend one is now done. Everybody has been dismissed, and they go home. Fast forward 1 month, and now we're into weekend 2. So everybody reports. They've got their name tapes. that they either purchased at and this is not sponsored by US Patriot, by the way, in any way, shape, or form. I was just to state that in Columbia, you can you can go on into the US Patriot store because it's just in like a little strip mall. But the other ones you cannot. But there are some other places that you can order online, and there are very specific guidelines that you must follow when ordering your name tape. So you come back and your uniform is squared away. Everything looks great. You're super excited. You're proud to have it on, and you park, you walk back through those doors again. You come in, you have a seat. Then what? What happens next, Sergeant Major?
Well, the second weekend goes into specific skills a little bit more than the first weekend, and I'm talking about performance type skills. We have a short period on Sunday, basic first aid, the kind of basic first aid that just keeps somebody alive until help can get there. On Saturday, we have a brief lesson on communications techniques, radio communication in particular. We visit the military museum. If you've never been to the South Carolina Military Museum, you're in for a treat. It's a wonderful resource that looks at South Carolina's military history. And we also, you mentioned that everybody is got their uniform on and it's perfect and they've done all the right things. This second weekend is an opportunity for us to see if you have indeed done all the right things, because we will have an in-ranks inspection and I will personally inspect every person. I look at haircuts, I look at shaves, I look at manicures, I look at whether you've got your uniform on properly, whether you've got the tapes and the patches on in the right places. I check to make sure that your pockets are buttoned and your zippers are zipped. All of those things that come down to the difference between attention to detail and just getting ready to go to drill. So we do that. We have that inspection. And we also have an inspection of your go bag, the materials that you are supposed to assemble in the event of deployment. Everybody has to bring that stuff, and we look to make sure it's there. So those are the things that we do on the second weekend. And of course, the culmination of the second weekend is the examination, the written examination. We have a comprehensive exam on Sunday of the last weekend, and starting in January of this year, if you don't pass the exam, you don't pass Francis Marion Reception Company. So it's we are striving always to make this a more professional organization, and that is a new requirement that's coming up.
Wow, that's definitely a change. I mean, it's a good change. Don't get me wrong. I agree with that. I'm an academic myself. Now, for those of you out there that are listening and your heart just sank into your stomach because let's say you have test anxiety. I do too. Okay. I have an incredibly intense test anxiety. Don't let it stress you out. I know you're sitting there thinking, yeah, easier said than done. I promise you, the way that Sergeant Major runs this program, as long as you go back and you review your notes, if you review your notes and you do some research, you'll be fine. Just know your content. It's no different than being a part of any other class. All of us have been in classes before. I mean, we know the process. It's the same thing. So please don't allow your anxiety to come in and mentally dismiss you from this process. They want you to succeed. It might not feel like it all the time, but they want you to succeed. Okay. Because why else would they be there? Why else would Sergeant Major be volunteering his time? Because remember, we're all volunteers. Why else would Sergeant Major Cabe be volunteering his time to be there when if all he wanted to do was find the flaws and to push people beyond their capacity so that way they fail? So please don't let yourself get into that type of headspace. All right, Sergeant Major Cabe. Well, I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for coming on and agreeing to give a little bit of insight into initial entry training for any new recruits that are out there, or maybe you've already gone through the first weekend and you've just discovered this, and now you kind of know what to expect for weekend 2 in a month. So again, thank you so much, Sergeant Major. I definitely am going to have you on again. I really appreciate your time and your expertise and your friendship as well.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next episode. This is Sergeant Joseph Goldsmith, out.